I wanted to give this talk for a while. It's based on personal experiences. I believe actually that most talks should be based on personal experiences, and as such, there might be some things that I'm going to say today that you may not agree with, and there might be some things that actually are going to get you upset, but that's okay. I don't care. So the first thing that I want to say is that frameworks are making us stupid. This is a feeling that I had throughout all my years of development. Based on one fact, frameworks make things so easy that they actually make us stupid. They make us take very stupid decisions. But before you start booing me and all that, there are two reasons why you have to wait for the end of this talk. One of them is that I have a point, even though it doesn't seem so, and the other one is that I have treats. So I have gifts for everyone. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people. So before I start saying what is wrong and why I think frameworks are making us stupid, let me tell you a little bit of a story of how I got myself into frameworks. I actually been coding for a long time. I'm old, obviously, but I started at a very early age. And the first web applications that I built were actually with C language. I know it's insane, but I did it. I moved to Perl. I know that's even more insane, but I did it as well. Then I moved to Java. Oh, wow. Okay. So, and then I moved to PHP. But when I moved to PHP, I moved to this client that had all this kind of code. And they thought this was awesome. Like, this is object-oriented, this is the right way to build code, and oh my God. Just because you have classes, interface, and everything doesn't mean that it's actually well-structured. You can build awful shit with classes and interfaces. So obviously, when I was at that client, this is what I wanted to do. I couldn't do it because I would get fired. I couldn't do it because I get fired. So the next thing is, okay, I need to bring some structure into this project. So the problem is that when you don't have any structure whatsoever, any structure may seem like a good idea. Does anybody recognize this movie? Yeah. Okay. Idiocracy. Well, when everyone is dumb, then the least dumb person becomes intelligent, and that was what I did. So the first thing that I did, I said, why not build an XML ORM? This was awful, awful. Actually, 30 people had to work with my stuff, and they still complain to this day. And this was 15 years ago or 12 years ago. So, but fortunately, around 2005, I saw a light at the end of the tunnel. And it was named CakePHP. I found CakePHP while looking for some sanity in my day-to-day job, and I said, okay, this is awesome. It's based on MVC, things are great, this is so comfortable to work with, so it's all good, right? Well, last year I organized a conference, and the year before, and I've been organizing conferences every year, and one of the things that surprised me, seeing a common sort of feeling and thinking in several industry leaders, at least on the PHP community. Fabien, for those who don't know him, actually, because of the statement, he built Symfony. And while he was drunk after 3 bottles of wine, well, he obviously confessed this to me, like, if I would do Symfony today, it would be completely different. And if I would do it tomorrow, it would be completely different. Then Anthony, not long ago, he said something that is actually very accurate. MVC, ADR, all these frameworks that they try to separate business from views and blah, 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 they're all really, really wrong. Because they focus on the very easy problem instead of focusing on what they really should be focusing, which is our business logic. They focus on how to present data instead of what we are doing with that data. Rasmus, well, everybody knows his opinion. If they don't, now you do. He thinks that all frameworks suck. So definitely something is going on in the industry. The first thing that we need to do in order to understand what is going on is that we have to stop taking everything for granted or believing whatever we've been reading about frameworks and all that. We have to also stop pretending or believing the fact that either you choose a framework or you don't. And if you don't, then you're writing spaghetti code. That's not right. You can write good code without a framework, and you can write shitty code with a framework. So first, let's break down what I believe are the good things, the bad things, and the ugly things about a framework, any framework. This is not related to CakePHP in particular. So for the good things, this is a good beer. So I'm going to start with the good beers. For the good things, frameworks provide us a way to do things in a common language and where everyone knows what to expect. We know that the data logic is in the models, we know that the views are in the views, and we know that the controller controls stuff. So that's pretty easy. It makes different developers understand and know pretty much very fast when they get into a project how to work and where to modify things and all that. Also, another thing that is great is the community behind it. There's a lot of smart people. They're all smarter than me. They're all smarter than you. And there are going to be more. There might be some exceptions, like the one holding the mic. But there's very smart people. And the good thing about smart people being on these open source projects is that they build stuff for you. So it makes you lazy. And actually, I think being lazy, I know. Being lazy is a really good thing. Because, sometimes you need to be lazy. So you can expect Jose, Mark, and the rest to keep doing things for you. And that's fine. That's great, actually. They should work, we shouldn't. So the bad things. Hidden complexity. This is something that struck me, well, throughout my career in different moments, but in particular when we were, like 2 years ago, implementing a solution that we need to record a lot of events that SendGrid, which is an email provider, and Customer I/O, which is a CRM, whatever kind of tool. We were using them to do a lot of things with our customers, so we needed to record in real time what kind of emails we were sending, and we were having millions and millions of hits, right? So we needed to build a REST app to take that data and put it in our own data store and then analyze it and whatnot. So when we approached this, I decided to do a little experiment. Okay, I'm going to use different frameworks and different sort of ways of doing this and see what happens. And the first thing that I saw is I started analyzing the number of lines of code. And before you say, analyzing number of lines of code is wrong, just wait a second. Laravel, 273,000 lines of code. The complexity, if you were at Anna's talk yesterday, then you understand. If you didn't, then you missed it. But that's the cyclomatic complexity. Then I use Silex plus Doctrine. Then I use Slim plus Illuminate. And then I use Slim plus PDO. You can see that there's a pattern there. The lower you get, the less code you're working with. And that's actually a pretty good thing. The less code you have to work with, the less bugs you're going to have. So I know, what the hell, no Lumen? I don't consider Lumen to be a micro framework because this is the number of packages that they require when you install them via Composer. So that is not a micro framework for me. I'm sorry. So it's more than just the number of lines. The number of lines, yeah, they tell us that we are using a large package. There's a lot of code which we don't know, and we don't know what it's doing. But there's also a lot of stuff that could be going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of what happens when I do this and what happens when I do that. Most people, we go with the flow. We assume that everything is going to be great. It was going to be great. They tell us that everything scales, so we believe that everything is going to scale very properly and everything is going to be great. But the next thing you know, one day you get hit in the face by one of those hidden features of the framework or of your choice. I wanted to actually introduce this graph in the last CakeFest, but I didn't. If I remember correctly. But this is what happened to me with one of these frameworks. I chose for one application, Lithium. I know, booing is allowed. For those with a little bit of history of CakePHP, you have reasons to go, boo. I chose Lithium, and we were seeing, whenever we had a huge number of simultaneous requests, we were seeing our servers, having to deal with a lot of processing power. And then one day, we discovered a hidden piece of code really well deep into the framework. When it was parsing the getText files, the getText that you use for internationalization, it wasn't doing it properly. It was doing it very, very lazily. We introduced caching into our wrapper, and suddenly we cut down our hardware expenses by half, actually by a third, I think. So that was hidden really within the framework. And if you didn't use internationalization, then you wouldn't have seen this problem. That's another problem, benchmarks. When you see a framework benchmark, it doesn't tell you anything. It tells you, okay, there's a Hello World app that works great, or maybe there's a more complex app, but it doesn't tell you how it's going to behave on your application, because your code is completely different from anyone else's. And that's what happened to me. I could have done 100 different benchmarks, but I would have never tested how the getText integration in that particular framework behaves when there are a lot of consecutive users. So the ugly. I don't believe that you don't recognize this place, Savant. I use the ugly, the Patriot Salon, because it's an ugly place. Those who have been there, they know that to be true. So one of the ugly things for me in frameworks has to do with technical debt. And this is, I think everyone, who's using CakePHP 3 in production? Raise hands. Okay, CakePHP 2? Okay, CakePHP 1? You see? PHP 5.6, who's using it? Okay, 5.5? Good. 5.4? 5.3? 5.2? Oh, well, there you go. That's technical debt. The problem with technical debt is not the framework's fault, because actually the framework has to evolve. It cannot be completely backwards compatible throughout its lifetime. That's why it makes perfect sense for Cake 3 to break with a lot of code that would actually work in Cake 2, and for Cake 2 to break somewhat, it wasn't that much, but a little bit of code that would work on Cake 1.1. But the problem with that is that when you're working on a long-term project, you're always battling with your boss or your client or whoever when to introduce big changes and when to introduce features. Sometimes, most of the time, for me it seems that most developers are coding with a life expectancy of 2 years for their code, which sort of makes sense because most startups don't last more than 2 years, so it's kind of a correlation. But the truth is that that's wrong. I worked actually in a project back in the day that had Cake 1.1. So back then I was working with the Cake team, when we released Cake 1.2, obviously I wanted to switch this project to Cake 1.2, and obviously it was a battle with the CEO. He didn't want to spend the time. It wasn't that much time to upgrade, but he didn't want to spend that time upgrading to Cake 1.2. But I still wanted the features. I wanted the behaviors. I wanted all the nice things that Cake 1.2 introduced. So what I had to do actually was spend more time backporting all those features to the Cake 1.1. So that makes no sense. That's technical debt for you. But why is it so hard to update? Why is it so hard to update a framework? Again, it's not the framework's fault. The problem is that the framework does so many things that for you to update your code base, you have to make sure that all those things that are within the framework are not going to break your code. So that's what most clients or CEOs are afraid of, that you have to take a lot of time to make sure that when you upgrade to a new major version of the framework, then you can do it safely. Another ugly thing for frameworks for me has to do with egos. I think you've seen, pretty much on Reddit or whatever, you see a weekly fight in a framework of choice, people fighting with each other and whatever, and calling themselves names and whatever. That's all fun and games, but the problem with that is that it affects your job, because egos are very hard for technological decisions. People not deciding to use a library because they don't like each other, that's not smart, that's not good. In the case of this guy, I think ego is justified, by the way. So what do? Do we drop frameworks altogether? Do we stop using CakePHP or whatever? I don't think that's right. I think what we have to do is start rethinking the way we build applications. There's this thing called the Unix philosophy. Who's familiar with it? States this. You write small programs, you make them communicate with each other in a common language. But the interesting part is writing small programs. And that's where most frameworks tend to get in the way, not because they are bad, but because they make us think so easy that we build everything within the framework instead of thinking and splitting things apart and separating into different elements. Because with a big framework, I can build a ship, and it's going to look like a ship. It's probably going to fly somewhat, and I'm going to be happy with the result. But it's different when I start making smart and conscious decisions about each component that I'm using to build the ship or the application. So the more the application grows, the more you're going to break it. You're going to want to break it down into little parts, into small parts. This is actually something that I've seen with any sort of like major companies in Latin American terms, probably means small companies in US terms, but they're still major. They still handle billions and billions of transactions on a monthly basis. And all those companies that I've talked to that are major players down there, they all went through the same process, building a monolithic application and then having to break it down for different reasons, not just performance, but for different reasons into little pieces. To the point that they will actually end up building their own APIs to communicate between each different service. So again, does this mean that I have to stop using CakePHP altogether? No, but I think what you will have to do is start rethinking the way you're building your application. You're not building a CakePHP application. You're building your application using CakePHP or whatever framework of code. Because the interesting thing is that you have to decouple your code from the infrastructure. Who's familiar with DDD, domain-driven design? Wow, that's very few people. Okay, there's this architecture that obviously I cannot explain here because it will require a completely separate talk that makes a clear distinction between your domain logic, the infrastructure, and the services. Everything has to be separated. So your domain logic should not know anything about infrastructure. What is infrastructure? Email sending, whatever router you decided to use. What is domain? My user entity dealing and how do I deal with user storage and whatever article, publishing or whatever. So DDD makes a strong point about having to separate that. It makes you write more code though, because you're going to start separating things so much that it's going to be a hard thing to do at the very beginning to make your entity classes completely framework independent. But it has actually a very good logic behind it. It makes you focus on your own problems. I shouldn't be concerned about how Cake stores data when I'm using an entity. I should be concerned about what my user entity is doing. I shouldn't concern about how that is being represented on the database that I'm using. I should only be concerned about the logic and the problems of my application. So what do I do to get to that road, to do something sort of where I start separating my code from the framework of choice? First, this is something that I introduced the first point because I was surprised yesterday that most people don't use worker queues. I cannot reiterate this more. You have to make all those things that don't require user interaction not be part of the user interaction cycle. So if you're sending an email, why are you making the user wait for that email to be sent? Just put that into a job queue and let the job queue process that. And whatever else doesn't require the user interaction should be put into a worker queue. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing that you have to start actually making sense of your application and moving towards a more decoupled code base. Does it have to be PHP? No. The advantage of worker queues is that you can implement job processors in different languages, in different technologies. You can use Go, you can use Rust, you can use whatever you want. Yes, Decouple. I know I said this before, but how does it look like on the code? I will start by decoupling your domain. Your domain, again, is the data, right? The entities, my user, my article, and all those things. I can do something. This is a little bit of an example. This is very slim, very stupid, but it gets the point across. This is a regular Cake3 ORM article table with an article entity, my article controller, fetching stuff from the entity and everything. So there are different problems here. If article is my entity and hence is from my domain, then I'm already tying the domain to the framework. So I have a problem there. The controller, which again is fetching the data, has all the logic of what I consider to be the latest articles or the articles that I want to show. That's another problem. That logic is right now in the controller side when it should be completely separate in my domain layer. There you go. What I can start doing is working through contracts. In PHP, normally you would do that with an interface. Start describing what the entity is supposed to be doing, what my repository or my storage, the place where I put the entities and I get the entities from, what it's supposed to be doing, and it's a clear representation of what I expect those two things to be doing. And those two things, that contract has no infrastructure detail whatsoever. They're completely pure PHP objects, and it's very clear what it does. Another thing that I'm putting there is that your entity should not be stupid. Like who uses Doctrine 2 or Doctrine 3 or whatever Doctrine version? Am I the only one, really? Okay. The problem with Doctrine 2 and other ORMs is that they favor an entity-based approach, which is great, but they favor very dumb entities in the sense that they only have getters and setters. I get my title, I set my body, and whatever. But when you think of an entity as a domain object, then that entity is supposed to have a little bit more. It should have more code in it. It should be doing something else rather than just simply saying and getting values. So don't make your entities dumb. They have to have code in it. They have to be doing something, but they have to be doing something within the domain layer. If you're putting code in your entity that has to deal with framework details, then again, we're tying the domain with the infrastructure, and that's wrong. That's going to get us in trouble. How is it going to get us in trouble? When we need to upgrade, if we want to upgrade our code from Cake 3 to Cake 4, which is, I'm assuming, is going to be released next month, then it's going to be a problem, because I have to, again, go through all my entity code and see what parts of the framework I'm using in there and see if it's going to break or not. If I had pure PHP objects, pure entities, then I wouldn't care about it. I know that I will have that code completely safe. The article repository. I make the article repository right here. Actually, this is an implementation of the contract that the repository has, or what the repository is supposed to do. But this is an implementation. This is an actual infrastructure class in my code. This is where I can tie my code to the infrastructure of choice, in this case, Cake 3. Now you may be wondering that if you saw before, the article entity it doesn't extend anything. It's a pure PHP object. So obviously, I lost all the nice things that Cake provides me, like validation and all that stuff. That's true, but you also gain control of your domain. You can test your domain code in memory with no infrastructure needed whatsoever. You can actually write your unit tests before you actually care about how to integrate it with the ORM or how to represent that data in the database of choice. But also, if you want to still maintain the Cake code behind the entity, you can use the entity trait. That's something that I discovered the other day. I didn't know it was possible. You can use the entity trait to introduce that code and make that still part of the infrastructure. You will make your base entity a pure PHP object, and then an implementation detail would be a class that would extend that domain object and use the trait. So then you will have validation and all that. But again, that's if you want to use the Cake entity code. You may not want to use that. You may want to actually use a completely different validation library, and that would be fine. That would be great. You can still use Cake 3 and decide on another validation library. The point is that you don't have to settle with things that you don't like how are being done, or maybe that you don't like where it's going. This is an awesome photo. Actually, I saw it today, so I had to put it. I would be very concerned. So one of the things that I do normally to make these kind of changes and separate, I use dependency injection a lot. I don't use containers. I use dependency injection. In particular, I prefer Aura.DI. I don't know why, just prefer it. I think it's like Anna. It was the first one that I saw and just use it. And I use dependency injection so I can clearly see that the implementation, the infrastructure implementation is for me an infrastructure detail. So I have a completely separate bootstrap process where I load the infrastructure details, where I change the repositories and implementation and all that. And the good thing about also dependency injection is that it allows us to look for other kind of packages or whatever different things that we want to use in our code. And fortunately, this guy created Composer, and that make all our jobs a lot easier. I honestly can't remember how we used to do things without Composer before. I really don't. It's like, yeah. Like today, just now I was on the Aura contribution, contributing to the PHP documentation project, and they use SVN. And it's been like 5 years since I don't use SVN, so I really couldn't remember anything. So yeah, I couldn't remember how to use SVN, and I couldn't remember what we used to do before Composer. This is a photo in Argentina on one of the conferences that we organized. The guy on the left is Jordi Boggiano, the creator of Composer. The guy on the right is Dustin Whittle. And the guy on the left got stolen his backpack and was replaced with an empty backpack that had that screwdriver in it. So he kept the screwdriver if he ever found the rover. So, okay, so when I want to use different things, okay, I want to replace the validation layer. I don't like Cake's validation layer. I want to use a completely different one. Go search for the package in packages. if you don't find one, if you find one, but you think that it should be changed or maybe it should be improved or whatever, then collaborate. If there's nothing then go ahead and create your own. Also, one of the things, I'm moving really fast with the talk because I prefer the questions. One of the things that you really need to do is make your framework do a certain set of things, or ask your framework to do certain set of things for you. The first, use semantic versioning. Cake does that. That's great. You know that a minor upgrade is not supposed to break your code. A major upgrade is supposed to give you headaches. So everyone understands that. That's perfect. Make the framework split itself into components. That's actually what Cake 3 did, and it's awesome. Make each part of the framework completely separate into components. So you can decide to replace a component if you want, or you can choose not to include a part of the framework if you want. Decouple its components. This is harder. I think there's only one project that did this properly, and it's not my favorite because I don't like Aura as a framework, but they did this very elegantly. All the components in the framework are completely independent of each other. So you don't, it's like, remember the slide where I show all the packages that Lumen, the micro framework, has? That's wrong. Even when they are all separate components, the fact that you have to introduce 20 different components to use one makes no sense. So yeah, they should decouple. Use standards. I know, yesterday on the Q&A, some standards were preferred, some others were not. But the truth is, even if they're not good standards or they're bad standards, they are standards, and they're there for a reason. PSR-9, who's familiar with this standard? Okay, very few. Okay, that was approved very recently. It's a common language for frameworks to deal with requests and responses. And if every framework supported this standard, it would make us reutilize middleware or whatever classes that deal with these components from whatever framework into whatever other framework without any code required to integrate. So that's an unbelievable achievement. Even if you don't agree with the way the standard is implemented, just supporting it is going to do a lot of things for the community. It's going to create a lot of interesting and fun tools to work with. Your framework should also have to deal with security. There are two standards that are being discussed right now that have to deal with what does a framework do when they have a security problem, how do they handle first the reporting, and how do they handle the actual publishing it to the world with the fix and all that. Before all this, the framework interoperability group, we sort of like went with the flow. Like whatever, now we have a bug, okay, we're gonna fix it, and we fix it, and whatever, and people wouldn't know, people wouldn't know. But when you have a lot of code in production, depending on your framework, then it's very important that the framework itself is very conscious and very professional about how it deals with security issues when they're reported and when they are fixed. So for me, the bottom line is actually, like I said at the beginning, frameworks make us smart. I know they make us stupid, but they make us smart because without a framework, you wouldn't go through all these different analysis and looking for ways to improve and to fix your day-to-day job. And I think because of that, frameworks are great. And I think the way most frameworks are headed, Cake 3 is one of them, is actually the best thing that they can do. Split into components and start making everything very small, very tailored, and very specific to your needs. So before I go to the questions, whoever asks me a question, they're going to get one of these treats. These are called alfajores. Each one is like 12,500 calories, I think. So they're good. So yeah. Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
When you created the repository, right, you absolutely extended the table. Why won't you pass that in as a dependency?
Yeah, you can. I don't remember the example now, but I'm going to put the slide. Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. This one? Yeah. Okay. So here, this is an implementation detail. Yeah, I could have easily do what you said, and actually, that's what I do. I normally build applications or my pet projects in Slim 3, and I use different. I use Doctrine as an ORM, and etc. And I do exactly that. I actually have my repositories being also pure PHP objects, and they get the implementation repository being linked in. Here, I wanted to simplify and make like a more easy transition to understand that, okay, this is a Cake repository as we are used to in Cake 3, but it's an implementation detail. That's why. But yeah, that would be the perfect approach.
Thank you,
Yeah? Oh, yeah, of course. You cannot ask me what the time is. That doesn't count. So I'm not going to throw it because it can get broken. So that's another point. Yeah, I have you. That's another point, actually. Don't get objects, inject objects. Don't use table registry get articles from your code, inject the articles table into your code. That's way better. That's way more testable and way more maintainable. That's actually decoupling. Who was it? You. Yeah. No, I'm seeing you. Yeah. Yeah?
I don't know if it's a question or you get your point of view, but you talk about decoupling and creating some module, but then it can easily fall into some of the Node.js problems or framework where all of a sudden you start a dependency and you can go and grab a coffee because there's so many dependencies that get loaded and then dependency depend on another dependency and it just takes forever. So what's your kind of point in that it's good to decouple, but then you get into that?
Again, because are you conscious? Do you use Cake? Okay. Are you conscious about how much of Cake are you actually using? How much of its code? You don't know, right? Okay, so you have a problem there. You have maybe 100% of the code base, and maybe you're using 30, or maybe you're using 50. When I have smaller dependencies, even though there are many more in quantities, because each one does everything much less than what a regular framework does, it's true, I'm going to get 15 dependencies instead of 1, but I know that out of each one of those dependencies I'm using 80% of the functionality. So I'm actually using it properly. I am actually using it to my needs. It does suit my needs. And there's less mystery hidden behind the code that I'm introducing. So yeah, that's the problem. That's what I keep bringing up Lumen. Okay, it's a micro framework, but you're introducing 20 different packages. I don't know which one of these I'm using. I want to make that decision myself. Oh. Alfajor. You want to catch it? Because I'm not going to walk all the way there. Yeah. Any other question? Yeah? That's not a question. Yeah. Yeah, you'll get one. Don't worry. Okay, so no more questions? Because I have a little bonus. Okay. So the one thing that I want to say, before we leave, is if you start implementing things your own, like I said, when you look for something in Composer and you don't find it, create your project. Before I leave you, just do it properly. Go over PHP The Right Way. There's a website called PHP The Right Way that has a set of guidelines of how to build stuff, like using PSR-2. I think this collides with Phil's. Is Phil here already? Phil Sturgeon? He's not here? Okay, he's going to talk right after me, so. He's supposed to be here. Anyway, he was supposed to be talking about, I think, so he's going to be here also. Okay, anyway, so PHP The Right Way, it teaches us a lot of things that we should be following when we're writing PHP code. Use dependency injection. What he was just mentioning right now is actually a great example of code. And obviously, unit tests. Unit is everything that you do in your repository. Other things that I would tell you, if you're going to publish this repository, use a code checker like Code Climate or Scrutinizer that runs a set of checks in your code, and it's going to tell you, how much your code is coupled with itself, how big it is, what kind of things that you can improve. It actually makes you a better developer. If you run these things, it's going to teach you to make code smaller and more maintainable than you normally are used to. Okay, that's it. This is my Twitter or my email if you want to email me. And thank you guys. Enjoy.